All right, now I'm talking with David Weiss at Rivendell Real Estate and Property Management. David, how's it going?
It's going great, Chris. How are you?
Doing fantastic. So let's jump into it. Everyone's question is, how did June 2020 stack up to June 2019?
For us, it was more of the same. I guess no news is good news. We had about a delinquency rate of about 5% in June. Last year, we were at 4%. So really no change year over year. As usual as it sounds, we continue to see people paying rent on time and as like normal.
Good. Well, that's great news. And how is July looking so far?
July, so far we're about 70% rent collected, which for us, the way that our accounting works and the way that we reconcile deposits, that's about where we normally are this time of the month.
Okay, and we're recording this on July 9th.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're pretty much on track to where you expect to be.
Yeah, I think we'll be right in that 95 to 98% rent collection by the end of the month.
Fantastic. Now, I know from talking with a few of the property managers that, Governor Polis, did let the eviction moratorium, I guess, kind of expire on June 15th, but with a 30-day posting now, how many people are you posting, like percent-wise? And then what are you recommending your clients? How do you handle people that need to be evicted?
So we are not posting currently, mainly because according to what our attorneys are saying, is that the 30-day notice is going to be lifted in July. I think July 13th, I believe, is the date. The other thing that is kind of an issue right now is we have, like we talked about last month, we have a lot of properties that are subsidized housing, and those fall under the CARES Act, which means you can't post at all. And I think at the 120-day, I think the CARES Act expires in July also, I believe July 25th. So we're just doing our best with the properties that we need, where we need to collect rent. We're just doing our best to work with those tenants to try to find solutions that work for everybody, payment plans, things of that nature. And then our plan is once we can move forward with evictions again, a little bit later this month, we're gonna take a hard look at our accounts that are significantly delinquent and start the process on those.
And, from the practical standpoint of getting people posted and then through the court system, whenever that backlog gets up, do you have a feeling you can go more towards, hey, posting, or more towards, like a pragmatic, hey, let's work with the tenants, cash for keys, or where's that fine balance of like, what do you think you'll actually do?
We always will turn towards pragmatic solutions first, whether it's cash for keys, working on payment plans, mutual rescissions of leases with less penalties. Those are always better options. That being said, if a tenant is not willing to cooperate, if they're not responsive, then at some point you only have one option, is that's to go through the eviction process. And a lot of times, posting a demand for rent or possession, that's enough. They know you're serious at that point, and a lot of times you can convince them to move out. So even after the demand is posted, we still continue to negotiate, try to work something out with the tenant right up until the 11th hour when the sheriff is at their door.
And circling back to what you said a few minutes ago about handling evictions with subsidized housing. So yeah. I'd like to kind of explore more about that because, from a very simplistic standpoint, a lot of the way subsidized housing works is, the government pays, 80, 90 or greater % of that tenant's rent. So is this a different type of program, or are you evicting people who aren't paying their portion of the rent?
So it depends. I was actually just talking to my business partner today about this. A lot of times, we will delay an eviction because maybe we're getting 90% of the rent. and maybe the property owner, maybe that's good enough. It doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to collect the rent that is owed, but from a financial standpoint, it doesn't make sense to evict that tenant, depending on how many months are left on their lease, how much money they owe, what the market's like. So a lot of times, we will just kind of continue indefinitely to collect the tenant portion, whatever's not being paid, but still collect the money from housing. So it really depends. It's a case by case basis, and what makes the most sense on each individual case.
Okay. And for, I know there's all different types of various programs there with the government. Are the majority of programs that you lease with, if the tenant loses his or her job, is the government picking up 100% of the rent then? Or how does that work in the current environment?
Yeah, so in theory, yes, but the responsibility falls on the tenant, and a lot of times that doesn't always work the way it's supposed to. So in theory, when a tenant loses a job, they need to contact their housing representative, explain that they've lost the job, and then the housing representative would then be able to make an adjustment to the portion of rent that they're responsible for. Unfortunately, oftentimes what we see is that the tenant will lose a job, not contact their housing representative. Housing will keep paying the same amount of rent every month, and then the tenant just doesn't pay their portion.
Oh, okay. And I've also heard, just from other, investors and property managers, I've heard, just some, general gripings now since, a lot of Section 8 or, employees, the housing authority employees are working from home. I know that's really slowed down communication, slowed down the process, and just, backlogged everything even more. Is that the same stuff you're seeing?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's been real challenging, especially with new leases, because housing is good once the ball's rolling, but getting the paperwork processed after you move in a tenant and getting that first payment can take up to 60 days. And with COVID and working remotely and all the things you mentioned, it's taking all of that 60 days, if not more in some cases.
Okay. And what are you seeing? I know last time we talked, leasing was hot. What's leasing like now?
Still hot. I had a listing go live just a couple of days ago in Denver. It was a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house kind of near 6th Avenue. And I think we had 25 showings scheduled in the first 12 hours that it was live. So it's depending on the neighborhood, the price point, leasing still seems to be very strong.
Don't let me ask, what was the price point on that house?
We were at 2,400, and
okay.
It was it's a kind of a Denver bungalow. It's got a basement. It's a little funky, but not a big house, but 4 bedrooms, 2 bath.
So a couple bedrooms crammed in the basement type thing?
Exactly. Like stick an egress in wherever you can just to call it a bedroom, and you might be able to get a twin mattress in there and an end table, and that's about it.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Cool. What other trends or notable items do you want to discuss?
Well, it seems to me with this whole COVID thing and the economy, unemployment being at 15% nationwide, 10% in Colorado, which is obviously better, cancellation of every major event you can think of kind of across the nation, in restaurants and bars and everything that's going on. I just kind of keep waiting for real estate to be affected, and at least in our bubble, it hasn't seemed to happen yet. But you have to think that the economic indicators would suggest that it's got to happen, right? Something's changing, something's going to happen, and my question is when and what and how severe. So I know that's not really an opinion, but that's certainly what I think's on everybody's mind.
You get any insight or just industry chatter? Because I think it's the end of July or end of August that extra $600 a month unemployment benefit runs out. And I imagine for a lot of people that's been helping them pay their rents. You got any concerns or insight into that?
Well, I think that's certainly one of the factors that's maybe delaying the inevitable is the stimulus money that people are getting, the unemployment that people are getting, the paycheck protection plan loans, the disaster relief, all these things that have been implemented to try to correct the economy for shutting down. I think eventually when that stuff runs out that there's going to be some consequences, and I think that's definitely what's delaying the inevitable.
Okay. Any advice you want to give out to, investors out there, whether they manage, have a property manager or self-manage? Like, what are you advising your clients, and just general advice right now from what you're seeing?
I mean, I think for me personally, and what I'm advising to our clients is that if you've got a slam dunk deal, go for it. I think now's as good a time as any if the deal really makes sense on paper. But if I would not be aggressively searching for deals, and I would not be stretching on anything right now. I think if you've got money to invest, I think patience is your best friend right now. I think we are on the cusp of seeing some changes, and it's hard to determine what those changes what opportunities those changes will create. But I think rather than invest foolishly, waiting is a very good strategy at the moment.
Great. All right, David. Well, I appreciate it, and I'll put your contact details in the show notes. If people want to reach out to you, they can reach out to you and talk leasing.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate the time.
You bet, David.